I want to preface this video by saying that I'm using Blender 2.90.1, which has some differences with the way that booleans are presented to us in edit mode. And what I mean by that is if I were to draw a box, we see that there's not a toggle for us to see the modifier in edit mode. If I were to press Q and add a bevel modifier, we see that there's a toggle here for us to display the modifier in edit mode, which means if I press tab, we can see the modifier in edit mode. And because of us not being able to see the modifier in edit mode, it does give us a slightly different experience whenever you're using a version under 2.91. But just letting you know that if you experience any issues when it comes to what I'm going to be showing with alignment, more than likely it has to do with using an older version of Blender before they added the ability to see the Boolean modifier in edit mode. So here I have Blender 2.92.0 alpha. And if we draw a box cut and click and apply it, we can see that there's a modifier that now shows an option to display the modifier in edit mode. Also, before going into edit mode and going into all of that, notice that whenever I draw this box, its alignment is actually being done to the shape itself. So that means if I were to rotate the shape, it will continue to align to this particular surface by the way that boxcutter tries to auto-calculate. So really this has nothing to do with the object's initial transformation or anything. It's just us grabbing the longest edge and assuming that that's part of the local matrix and then letting you basically work off of that. However, there's alternative ways that you're able to work inside of boxcutter. One of those is utilizing the longest edge or the nearest edge. So if we expand on our orientation panel, we can see these options. And we're just going to turn this to nearest edge. And just notice that our orientation did not change, but whenever we draw on the inside, our orientation did change over to the nearest edge that we're looking at in this area. And so let's try the same thing here. Still isn't going to allow us to work. So we see that it's not the most reliable way to work, just changing your orientation on the fly. In fact, this cut almost looks like it was at the right orientation, but it isn't. So we can go back to our orientation panel and change it from nearest edge to longest edge and hope that that improves things. But you know, the longest edge nearest to the cuts that we're starting is more than likely these long boundary edges that actually trim our bevels. So whenever it comes to dealing with orientation, there's a lot of different ways that you can approach it. If you're using box, you can just jump over to line box and actually just draw at the angle that you need whenever you need it, which is my preferred way to drawing inside of boxcutter, just drawing lines, holding control to snap, or turning on perma snap in the event that you do not want to hold control, which is definitely a recommended option. But this is one way you can, use line box to get the most out of box in order to work at those tricky angles. Another way is that by going in edit mode, we can actually select edges and orient to those edges. So let's say that this mesh was real. So these modifiers are applied. Well, now I can go in edit mode, I can select this edge, and then if I perform a box cut, we're now oriented to the edge that's selected. And if you don't believe me, we'll select another edge and try to draw a cut, and we see that it's oriented differently. So this is another way that you're able to work if you have some geometry to kind of get you started inside of boxcutter. So here I'm needing to select this edge in order to cut around this particular form. Since that edge is congruent with this one, I'm able to still continue cutting in this area as well. And just like that, I'm able to have control over my alignment whenever it comes to edit mode. And the best part is all these cuts are happening non-destructively, as you can see at the top. So everything is taking place in object mode. But whenever it comes to orientation, there are a few options for helping you get the most out of it. But one of my favorites is definitely the new edge orientation system that has been added to boxcutter as of 7.17. So continuing on, another way you can deal with orientation is active only. So right here I shift right click to place my 3D cursor, and I'm going to shift A, add a plane, and we'll just rotate this plane onto Z, and using HardOps we'll just shade it to be a wire, and we're going to turn on something called active only under behaviors. And active only will allow you to use the active object to align to the selected. So here I have the plane selected, and then I have the object selected. And let's actually change this to be just regular old box instead of wedge box. So we could actually press Control D and bring up our helper to turn off wedge. And here we are actually using this plane to orient our drawing. So there's multiple ways that you can actually override some of the rules that we have set with boxcutter. We want to give users as many choices as possible whenever it came to such things. So in the event that you ever need to just override it using a custom shape, just know that you can do that using the power of active only.